John Solomon is an award-winning investigative journalist. He has worked for the Washington Post, the Washington Times, I think the New York Times, AP, and The Hill. He now has a new website called justthenews.com. Justthenews.com. Investigative journalist John Solomon, who is at the center of much of this scandal in Ukraine. Welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Glenn.
Thank you. You want to start with any breaking news, any new news?
I do. As a matter of fact, just a few minutes ago, my friends at the Southeastern Legal Foundation and I filed a lawsuit seeking the records of contacts between Ukraine prosecutors and our embassy in Kiev, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. These are some of the contacts that are at the heart of this impeachment trial, and we're at really the focal point of my early reporting on this. There was a dysfunctional relationship between the frontline anti-corruption fighters in Ukraine and our embassy, and that's why I wrote the stories that I did. I put a FOIA in seeking open records request for this information. It hasn't come, and so today, with the help of the Southeastern Legal Foundation and a great law firm here in D.C., I filed a lawsuit to try to compel the release of these documents. I think they'll give us tremendous insight into what was going on between Ukraine prosecutors and the embassy on all sorts of issues, from the Joe Biden Burisma questions to other anti-corruption cases that were going on at the time.
Okay, so what does your gut say that they will show or prove?
Well, my reporting shows from in past. Remember, there's a Ukraine prosecutor who says that they were the United States government was pressuring Ukraine prosecutors not to pursue certain cases, including a case against a George Soros-funded non-government organization, a nonprofit. And State Department officials confirmed to me before I wrote that story that, yeah, that did go on. And then we had some of the testimony during the impeachment where they acknowledged that the State Department acknowledged it was pressuring Ukraine prosecutors not to pursue certain people. I think we're going to learn a lot more about what motivated those contacts, who those people were, and what sort of communications were going on between the prosecutor's office and the embassy. At the time, we had the Manafort case going on. We had the questions about Burisma and Joe Biden, and there was an active investigation in 2016. I'd like to know what was going on, what sort of function, what sort of communications, who was politically involved. And hopefully when we're done, we're going to learn a lot more than what we know now.
So, John, what do you expect or hope will come out of this trial when Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz and the Trump team step to the plate in probably 10 days from now?
Yeah. Listen, it's been a one-sided story so far, just like the beginning of the Russia collusion story, right? And everybody was certain on January 9th of 2017 that the Christopher Steele dossier was gospel, and oh my God, our president was an agent of Russia. And 3 years later, we learned out that all of that turned out to be bunk. The most important thing about politics and about investigations is that there's two sides to a story. There's two pieces of evidence. And right now, we've only seen one side of it. And I believe in the trial, we'll begin to see a lot of different new pieces of evidence. For instance, if the president was interested or concerned about corruption, were there specific people around President Zelensky, the new Ukrainian president, that he might have been concerned about? Was there a specific cause or pause that caused the administration to hold off giving the money until they could be sure it was spent right? And those are the sort of things we haven't heard from. And I think we're going to learn a lot about what the intelligence community, what the economic and Treasury Department community was telling the president. And I bet the story's way more complicated than the narrative that Adam Schiff has woven so far.
So we do know now that there is somebody around the president of Ukraine that Trump is worried about or was worried about. We have that evidence now because of the massive land sale that went to George Soros. And that came from somebody who pressured the president to make this move, who is in his, if you will, cabinet, who is very close to George Soros. So isn't that kind of proof that these people are still around him?
Well, there's a lot. Listen, there was an oligarch named Kolomoisky who used to run Privat Bank, the large bank in Ukraine, and you can go back in the timelines and look. And back in the summer of 2019, in the fall of 2019, the IMF, the Europeans, were raising their hands, saying we're really concerned about Kolomoisky's return to Ukraine around Zelensky. There are a series of figures of people who've played in Ukraine that have big political and economic interests. The Soroses, the Kolomoiskys, the Zlochevskys, the guy who ran Burisma. These are legitimate issues, and what we don't know, and what we've been blinded to all this time, was what was the CIA, what was the NSC, what were the diplomats, what were the European allies telling to the president. I suspect there's a much more complicated paradigm that was influencing the president's decision than, I want an investigation of Joe Biden. And by the way, here's the most important part to remember about the Joe Biden investigation, the Burisma investigation. I know Rudy Giuliani was advocating for it. We see Lev Parnas was advocating for it. We know it came up as a matter of discussion in the call. But everybody misses this very important point. Before all that happened, the Ukrainians, on their own, in February of 2019 and in March of 2019, in Ukraine, announced that they were reopening the investigation of Burisma. It had already happened, so people didn't know. Maybe the NSC didn't tell the president. But the investigation, the president couldn't pressure for an investigation that had already been opened on its own organically because Ukrainians came up with new evidence against Mr. Zlochevsky and Burisma. And that investigation remains ongoing today. So it started in February and it's still going on today. Reuters reported in December that it had been expanded to even more serious issues than had been previously reported. That keeps getting lost in this impeachment drama. And I think one of the questions senators as jurors have to answer is, if the NSC and the State Department knew the president was seeking an investigation, why didn't they just tell the president, sir, you don't need to worry about it. It already has begun. There was a real gap of information there, it appears, from what we know. We saw all these impeachment witnesses say, we knew the president wanted this, and not a single one of them appears to have told the president, sir, back in February it already happened. And I think that's one of the issues that the trial is going to have to try to resolve.